Welcome to the Subconscious Photography Podcast, where art meets science, reality meets perception, all through the lens of a camera. Now, please ready your lenses, open your minds, and let's delve into the fascinating world of subconscious photography. Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Subconscious Photography Podcast. I'm your host, David Oresick. I hope you like that new intro music. We're testing it out today. So please do me a favor, leave a message in the comments, send us an email, whatever your preferred method of communication, just let us know what you think of that new music. Today, and in this episode, we have another great interview, this time with an artist who is the executive director of the Mattress Factory Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In addition to being my cousin by marriage, David Oresick holds a bachelor's in fine arts in photography from the Rochester Institute of Technology and a master of fine arts in photography from Columbia College in Chicago. I'll let David fill you in on the rest of his details. One thing that I did find interesting is David's discussion of how putting together zines during his time in college, with all the editing and layout that those zines entail, really fostered his interest in curating and ultimately led him to museum work. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Here's my interview with David Oresick, Executive Director of the Mattress Factory. I want you to know, I put you into, and AI knows you, bro.
Oh, yeah. I tell AI everything. It writes all my copy now.
Oh, is that right? There you go. But I did a search for you, and you came up, man. I don't think I come up, or I didn't try, but
The executive director's life is a little more public.
you're famous, bro.
Yeah, not everything in there is great, but
All right, at first I'm going to, because I am a lawyer, I'm going to ask you if I have permission to record you.
you may record me.
See, because if not, we'd be in violation of Pennsylvania's Wiretap Act.
Oh, I know. And I learned some things during COVID. No, I've been recorded without my permission in some cases before.
Yeah, I think that.
I don't think the people making the recordings were aware of Pennsylvania's Wiretap Act. And there was a
Broad. I'm just going to say it's very broad. It covers a lot of wires. Let's just say that.
yeah.
You guys, do you have any snow and ice? Because I had to walk across my driveway and there was black ice. And since I'm still moving crap in here, every morning I come in with a new bag of stuff. And so I was carrying that.
Yeah.
Coffee, like water, because there's nothing to cook with in here. That's why I'm saying, like, we were really bad landlords. There's a stove.
But how committed are you to this place? Are you going to go back into the house, or is this just your new?
Oh, listen, I've been told I can't go back into the house. And this is actually a legitimate question for you, for your expertise. So this house had a tendency to, let's say, grow mold. Now, when we had one of those really bad storms that hit here up the East Coast, I can't even remember, but we were stuck in Block Island. It was August. And I can't remember. It was right. Must have been the summer of 21. And the whole bottom floor flooded. And so we had the whole thing ripped out. They remediated the mold, right? I had 2 50-pint dehumidifiers running almost all the time to keep it a delight for 35%. Now, I have not moved any of my cameras in here, which are the majority of what's left in my guest room, which my son has now claimed as his new bedroom.
Let's become a little bedroom.
He's 6'3.5", and his feet hang over his full-size bed.
Right.
So I could get like a queen-size bed. I'm like, bro, that's just going to give you more rolling around room. It's not going to make it any longer.
Yeah.
but he's tired of sharing a bathroom with his now 13-year-old sister.
Yeah, I can see that.
And that room has its own bathroom.
Okay.
So he's cleaned it, but about 25% of it is camera bags loaded with cameras and shelves loaded with cameras.
I would say if you can just get like a
drying cabinet.
It's just, if you're worried about things getting particularly bad, you can get one of those like Amazon, just like humidometers or whatever they're called, and just have it like ping your phone with an alert if it like gets too humid.
Yeah, no, I have that in here. I have it in here.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, you don't think I need like a cabinet on top of what I got?
I don't think so.
Because yeah. If I get mold and fungus in my lenses, people will pay.
Oh yeah. You got a policy on your lenses?
Yeah. No, actually, no, I probably should.
Yeah, that's just better. The only thing I might do is just sometimes it's nice just to itemize everything and send it to your homeowner's policy and like to document it in case. Because I don't know how valuable your collection's getting. If it's something that you're not too worried about and it's like kind of used equipment that you're just fond of but isn't actually worth very much.
There's 2 Hasselblad 500 CMs and that. Yeah.
I don't think it hurts to make a little spreadsheet of what it is when you got it and just make sure your agent is aware that it exists. Because I think that's the kind of thing that I've just seen is if something does happen, those policies are pretty shitty about.
Oh, true. That's true. And since I am a lawyer that sues insurance companies for a living, I should probably have thought of that.
I'm a guy who tries to not sue my insurance company, but just make nice with them. So when I do make a claim, they're like, there's nothing they can do but help me. So,
by the way, when we remediated everything in here, they're like, if you report that, your company will drop you. Because let's say we had some water issues in the other house. So it's, okay, thanks.
What was the cause of the water infiltration?
It was that this house was never meant to be like a house. And it's a stone foundation that was never waterproofed. So we trenched it.
So it's waterproof now. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure that wasn't cheap.
It was fun though.
Yes.
Henry says that it's so cold in here, we should set up a Bitcoin mining farm.
There you go. That's the real entrepreneurial thinking.
I told him that we only have 200 amp panels and we probably couldn't plug all the miners in safely.
Yeah. Get more amps. We just got an electric car, so our panel is stretched.
Do you have what kind?
The Hyundai, the Ioniq 5.
And is it just like 110?
Yeah, it's like a 240. You could do,
because we have a plug-in Volvo and we only have 110. And sometimes I plug it in, it'll be ready tomorrow at 4 p.m.
Yeah, the 240, and it doesn't have any gas at all. If it's totally, we're at like 10%, it'll take 5 hours.
That's it?
Yeah, it's a lot more electricity. I don't know how it works, but it was only like $3,000 to get the whole thing installed. And we don't have a driveway, so we just have to like hope that we have the parking space in front of our house.
And then what do you do?
I don't know. There's other chargers.
I don't know. You run the wire out of the house?
Yeah, just running out of the house. I have a little mat that like runs over the cords. Will watch your step.
Because the city of Philadelphia used to give you your own parking spot if you had one and like you wanted a charger installed. But of course, in typical Philadelphia fashion, everybody parked in the spot, whether they had a gas car, truck car, and you'd get home and you'd be like, wait, that's my spot. And people would laugh at you.
Yeah. I remember one time in Chicago, there was it was a snowstorm and someone shoveled out their space and they put a chair in to save it. And then I like, oh, here, yeah. Came home at the end of the day and I was like, then there was a car parked in there and the chair was moved. And I was like, I don't think that's the right car for that space. I wasn't sure. And then I walked back again to go out later, and the chair that was moved had been put through the windshield of the car.
That is so South Philly. I'm like, I thought that only happened here. That's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we got snow. Do you guys have snow?
We had a nasty day on Saturday, and we got not that much snow, but it turned into a sheet of ice. And our neighborhood has a lot of hills, and there was cars. Every stop sign is knocked over, and like tons of cars went off the embankment. And there was just like, because then Pittsburgh's broke, so they didn't salt anything till 12 hours later.
That's so awesome because it's no better here. Like, I just really thought that it was really just that bad here. I'm glad to learn that.
Yeah. All right. So where should we begin? How do you want to do this?
I'm going to ask you your name, rank, and serial number. What do you think of that?
Yeah.
And so I read your LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I read here, just in case you wanted to know, I'm going to read you what AI says about you.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
David Oresick is a prominent arts administrator and curator currently serving as the executive director of the Mattress Factory Museum in Pittsburgh. Prior to this role, he held the position of executive director and chief curator at Silver Eye Photography, also in Pittsburgh. He completed his Master of Fine Arts in Photography at Columbia College in Chicago and earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography from the Rochester Institute of Technology. As both a curator and artist, Oresick has established himself in the contemporary art world. That's just the background. Now for your professional career. Oresick has made significant contributions to Pittsburgh's art scene through his leadership roles at the Mattress Factory. He has been noted for fostering artistic collaborations and overseeing various exhibitions and events. Beyond his administrative roles, Oresick has been involved in creative projects, including contributions to documentary works such as May 2, 2011, Morgantown, West Virginia, Osama bin Laden is Dead, and lecture notes for beauty therapists in 2013. That's really it. I was hoping for more, some photos of you drinking in college or something. But yeah, that's gleaned from every press release that was ever sent about you. So
Yeah.
fill in the blanks for us.
Fill in the blanks. Yeah. Yeah. Where should I begin? Do you want me to?
I know you were born on a cold, snowy day in Pittsburgh, and no, not that far, but
Yeah.
or was like college or stuff.
Yeah. Maybe even just to set the context, because a lot of this was just my path to photography. Really started in high school, and a lot of it was I was very interested as a very typical photography artist in the sense that I became really interested in contemporary art in high school and places like Mattress Factory, especially Mattress Factory, because back then there wasn't a ton of contemporary art in Pittsburgh. The Carnegie was a very encyclopedic museum. You'd see Monet or you'd see ancient vases, whatever. And I had would go to a trip to New York. I would see like some stuff that was really just unlocking my brain about what art was and could be. But it was also in a high school in a city environment, and it was hard to, it wasn't I'm not a good hand renderer with drawing or painting in art class. In high school was largely painting and drawing. And so we went to this after school art center called the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild, and they had a bunch of mediums. They did ceramics, they did photography, they did visual arts. It was a really great kind of free after school program for city school kids. And they had a beautiful photography studio, a dark room, kind of cameras you could take on. They would just give you free film. You could come as much as you wanted. You could tell you what
year was this? You were shooting film?
Yeah. So this was probably started in 98 when I was like a freshman in high school, 99. And it was a beautiful dark room. It was all free. You would just go. And they were real artists working in photography. And I didn't really know that was a thing. And that was just like very exciting to me. And partially I was just like, oh, there's a creative outlet. Some of it just started from the simplest place. There's a creative outlet where I don't have to draw good. And I can make art and be creative and experiment and try things. And I really just spent a ton of time there. And I really fell in love with it. I really fell in love with printmaking in the dark room. And I think the materiality of printmaking was always really important to me, and experimenting with different kind of papers and stuff like that. So that kind of led me on this path. And I went to undergrad to Rochester Institute of Technology, which in some ways,
A mecca.
the Mecca. In some ways, I was out of sync there. It was a very technical program, a very advertising oriented program, very professionalized program. But they did have this kind of fine arts program within the program where video and experimental things and all these things were happening. And in some ways, I really struggled a lot with the shootable serial kind of assignments to make it look like a Saturday morning ad. That was never my interest, never anything I was good at, but I really loved the creativity.
Yeah.
I loved art history. And a lot of my work as an artist and an art administrator, I don't really even think about them as different things anymore, because I think, I think about the art of leadership is as much as creative as anything for me.
Yeah.
But a lot of what I did back then that really laid the groundwork for where I was now was experimental things, was pushing limits, pushing boundaries, doing appropriation, thinking about breaking tools and like hacking cameras and stuff like that. And but one thing that really became the core was like doing zines and student art shows and publications. I think there was a kind of institutional RIT, like, here's the student publication. And me and my friends were like, no, we're going to do our own thing. And we'll throw keggers at our house to raise money to print 300 copies of a zine, and we'll edit it. We'll ask our friends to contribute. We'll make these. So doing these kind of magazines or renting a warehouse space and putting on a show, like, just became really, really central to me, which was just like, if the thing that I've realized time and again is, if you want to see the kind of art you care about in the world, don't wait for someone else to do it. Like, and you just learn so much. You learn about working with people push you. I always love that kind of collaboration, push and pull. And yeah, and I got through there and just in some ways went straight to grad school, went to Columbia College, Chicago, and studied with some amazing people like Dawood Bey and Barbara Kasten. And really,
Before we talk about that, let me ask you something both about high school and RIT. About high school. So when I was in high school, my photography experience was limited to having a key to the darkroom, because we actually had one, taking football pictures for the newspaper and the yearbook, and trying to figure out how to keep booze in the darkroom at all times. And that was it. Like you said, there was only sketching, drawing, painting, but no photography. They assumed that we were coming to it with our own equipment, with the exception of the darkroom stuff. I don't know but do you know if it's changed at all? Digital obviously makes it a lot easier in terms of not needing darkroom space in a public school and that kind of stuff. But do you know, our high school curriculum still basically drawing?
I don't know that much about high school curriculums. I've taught in the university level for a long time, but we do work with high school programs here at the museum. My sense is that it's always been a tough program for strapped school districts because cameras and film and paper are very expensive. I think obviously everyone having a phone has really changed the conversation. It's really changed everyone's relationship to photography and images, and especially image dissemination. I think about my high school had a darkroom. It didn't have any budget for chemistry or paper. And so that's why this like other after school program where you take a bus across the city to get there was a big deal. And so my sense is, at least for the programs I know of at the kind of more public schools, which was I was saying this, so it's still a really uphill battle. And I think as kind of chemical photography has become more kind of boutique and just at a smaller scale, I think it's fewer people know the craft. I think fewer people, and the cost of these things, just because we're not buying them in economies of scale, is going up. So I'm not hopeful. I'm not feeling super great about the people getting in at the high school level with kind of film.
So I emailed Henry School, which is not a public school and is not strapped, because when I was there for one of his parent-teacher things, his teacher is actually one of the art teachers. And she's like, oh, Henry tells me you still shoot film. And I said, yeah. You want 5 enlargers?
Yeah.
And I'm like, 5 enlargers. I'm like, no, I don't really need 5 enlargers, but thank you. And then I emailed later, and because as we were talking about earlier, I have a bunch of cameras. And I said, if you ever want me to come in and teach a film class, I'll hand out. I have a bunch of old Nikon Nicker mats, right? They can take them, shoot some film. I'll process them, I'll scan them, and they can do whatever you want them to do with it on a computer. And I've heard crickets in response. I offer to pay for everything.
Yeah. The thing I've noticed with our teens here is that I think there's a kind of nostalgia threshold for things. So like what was happening 20 years ago, I think is interesting to young people now. And whereas a couple years ago, people were interested in film cameras and film photography, I've noticed a lot of kids that we've been working with. I think I'm really charmed by this. I think it's awesome. They want kind of a Coolpix camera around 2004. And just the kind of shitty low end digital camera and like that aesthetic and that quality and that resolution, those crummy lenses, like they all lead to these really, I think, beautiful romantic pictures. In some ways, I think the conversation is like always changing. And the conversation has been changing for 200 years in terms of technology and what's interesting and what's relevant. But now I think whereas film versus digital for so long, and now is nice digital versus crummy digital or something. Yeah, exactly. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. The one question I had for you about RIT was that I had always heard that it was like a chemistry school, right? You go to learn how to mix chemicals for Kodak or how to paint emulsion on film. How much of that was there as part of this curriculum? It was highly technical when I was there. And that was like something that never particularly interested me, but I'm glad I know it. And I think so there was a class called Materials and Processes of Photography, which was some chemistry, some physics, talking about how light behaves with lenses, drawing a lot of graphs and stuff like that. Interesting stuff. But I think I was there in the early 2000s. So it was a really changing moment where industry was starting to change over. And even in the 4 years I was there, you could see that change from 2003 to 2007 or whatever. It was really picking up fast. And just the typical things where people say digital could never do this, and then 8 months later it does it pretty well. And this is the journey of technology. So it was highly technical. I dreaded the plotting of the S curve of reciprocity failures on whatever kind of film. But they were also, there's something interesting too, where they would say, we would do, okay, let's do some digital theory. And it'd be like, let's talk about the algorithm of the Photoshop sharpening filter that we use for our preprint process or something like that. Or let's talk about the chemistry of these inks that were pretty bad at that point. We're developing quickly. And I think they were trying and struggling to say, how do we talk about these digital processes in a way that like, in some ways, the chemical processes were rudimentary physics and chemistry that like an art student could understand. And some of these digital processes became such a high level of like computer science and algorithmically controlled things that it was just so impenetrable. So you learned a lot. And then of course you learned a lot about the things I really enjoyed a lot of was like learning about perception and lighting and doing things. Because I think so much about photography that I've really come to think about is more than any gear or any camera or any process. It is just like, how does light fall on objects? Like what are qualities of light? How do you control them? How do you shape them? What is, like, I think, and I don't think I realized this in undergrad. I think I realized it years later that like, you're only thinking about light. And right. So that's, but very technical and a little too technical for me, but like I got through it.
And then she said, as you said, you went to Columbia College. And what was it like there studying with Dawood Bey and all the people you must have studied with there?
Yeah, it was interesting. Still very young. I just graduated undergrad. I was really passionate about art. And in some ways I was in this photography field, but I wanted to be in a more expanded photography field and be more of an art generalist. But I was coming from this place of photography. I was making a lot of video. I was working with a lot of appropriated images and thinking about collage and other things. But truthfully, a lot of it was just being 23 or whatever. And a lot of my friends were moving to New York to work in New York or LA to work in industry. I didn't want to do that. I didn't know what else to do. I was just like a 23-year-old with a humanities degree. I was like, what do you do with your life? What are the options out there? And so someone told me about grad school and I was like, let's tell me more. And it's just, we'll just keep going to college, but there's no more chemistry classes. Just take art classes. And I was like, all right, that sounds good. And I figured I could do that. And they're like, then you can be a professor. And I was like, great. I like my professors. I want to looked at a couple schools. Someone mentioned Columbia. I knew Dawood's work and I was always really inspired by it. In some ways, Columbia was an odd fit for me as a program because it was a very traditional program in the idea that people were like a lot of professors there, a lot of students there were making beautiful photographs of people's places and things. And I was beginning to work more in experimental film and thinking about digital culture and online work. And I was thinking about curating and a lot. So my practice was going in all these strange directions, but truthfully, I didn't get into a lot of other schools and I didn't know what else to do. So I just took a flyer on it. And again, like I think it was, looking back, it seems weird because it wasn't necessarily the school that made the most sense with my interests. But sometimes I think being in places where your interests are really directly served isn't a great thing for you. I think there was a lot of people that thought about art differently than I was thinking about it, that challenged me, that were like genuinely like really brilliant, inspiring people. And when you're 20s and you're figuring out life and you're figuring out art and stuff like that, it was a very, very critique heavy program. So it had this kind of American art school model of every 2 weeks. Yeah, it's a little bit you suck, but it was more just there's 10 of you in this class. 5 of you are going to show photos every other week or show whatever you made. And we're going to start at 8 a.m. and it's going to go till like we're done at 5 or 6. And so there was just these marathon days of really talking about art, talking about each other's art and just going, and like really exhausting. But I think it also made me fall in love with the conversation, thinking about art together as a community and pushing back on things and this push and pull, which is like so wonderful. And as a student, you really take it for granted. And then you get out into the world and you're like, oh, art is such a lonely thing in so many ways. Like it's hard to find people to talk about it with or to really push at length. But so that was a really fun.
It's funny you mentioned those crits because when I was, I guess, in college, when dinosaurs fell to earth, and I was working at the 1-hour photo lab in my local mall. One of the lab techs that worked with me was a Moore College of Art student. And I remember her coming into work the day before the morning of one of those marathon sessions. And she was crying from the time that she arrived at work until she left. And that was before it all happened. So at that point, I was like, man, I am glad I didn't go to art school.
Yeah, it's very emotional, right? Like you're putting your heart and soul into some stuff. Especially you're so young, you're figuring out. I think the hardest thing about those programs is could be 23 or 24. You're putting your heart and soul into something. And typically you're not very good yet. Like you're really like learning to develop your craft, to develop your voice, to figure out who you are, to figure out what you're interested in. And you're raw, you're tender, some things are working, a lot of things aren't, and you're putting stuff out there and people are giving you that feedback. And it can be really painful. And that's one of the things I just don't know how I feel about anymore, whether that pain is, I think in some ways, a lot of people say the pain of critique, of ripping people down or even just giving them feedback is like part of the process and it's part of growing. And I think there's other models that are gentler. And I don't think there's any one way up the mountain. I think as I've gone on in my career, I think it's more just a curious anomaly those years. Because most of your life as an artist is you're like playing golf alone or something. You're just by yourself.
That's a good analogy.
And you miss the feedback. You miss the community. You miss people. I think maybe if you're lucky, you have a small group of trusted confidants who have the time and energy to look at each other's work and push each other forward. But for the most part, a creative endeavor is for things like photography are lonely, or at least things you do alone. Yeah, I'm a very social person, so I always find it very lonely.
Yeah, no, it's very similar to going to law school, right? Like the Socratic method in law school, it makes you cry. I saw people walk out of class crying because they got questioned by the professor about a particular case and got it totally backwards. And the constant, continuous questioning, even when it was obvious that the person was never going to get the right answer. And then compare that to the practice of law, which is very solitary, right? Like people think that it's a social profession, but most of the work is done by yourself, right? You're writing, you're if you're doing trial work, you're getting ready for trials or whatever, but you're not really socially interacting. Like law firms, I like to say, are just like combinations of single solo practice lawyers, right, that just got together to share the rent. It's because one guy could be doing tax law and some other guy is doing personal injury. And so I get what you say. I get what you're saying. Although I will say this, I'd rather be alone with my camera taking pictures somewhere than sitting alone trying to write a brief, because I still think that's like birthing a cow. But
I think that's the thing with a creative practice is that there's got to be some joy in it, and there's got to be like, and I think this is one of the things that I often saw a pitfall of kind of academia or academic programs in art is I think there are people who actually like the discourse. They like the room of people talking about art. They don't like the studio time or the out shooting time of being alone, and they find this trouble there. And in some ways, like I was one of those people. I going out and making pictures and making work, like it requires a tremendous amount of discipline and the motivation of I'm going to take this to a group of people on Friday morning to get feedback from, and I want to please them, and everything. Like it was a very external force for me. And I think that's what led my practice to change into a more kind of administrative, curatorial like vein, because I realized like I'm actually much more motivated by a social collaborative like thing than I am just like my sweet spot never was like going off to the studio alone or going out photographing all day. Like I think I always felt like a little bit of an imposter because I knew so many people who like that's what they live for, and I respected them so much. And so that's kind of the next step in my journey was I was in grad school was really landing a fellowship at the Museum of Contemporary Photography, which is a museum housed at Columbia College. And that's where I learned is very like sit the front desk or help hang pictures or paint this wall kind of fellowship. But I met amazing, brilliant directors, amazing curators, and they let you sit in the room where they talked about how they organized shows, how they thought about photography, how they were kind of thinking about presenting the conversation of photography to a big public audience, and who was inspiring or interesting to them. It was a collecting institution, so some of the collecting meetings were the first time I had seen about that. And then I always say that's where I learned a lot of the dark arts of you do it with a budget. I like how that's kind of dark art. Yeah. And maybe it was like very naive, but I think coming into it, it just never occurred to me museums had budgets. It just never was something I thought about. It was just like you find the best art and you put it in the collection. Like that's what museums do. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, all these decisions are being made about a kind of strategic allocation of resources. And that's actually quite challenging. And just all the other stuff. And it was a wake up call for me, but it was like just a really inspired place. And I think I was also just lucky. It was just such a great museum with such great people working in it that really mentored me over that time there. That's when I realized my practice was like, it is some making, it is some curating, it is some administrating, I think at my best, I'm like convening people and like thinking about things and like making it's very like community centered. And that's where like I found the kind of intersection of all these creative places for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that, because it's rare to meet somebody who does all those things and wants to do all those things, right? There are people who can do all those things, but not happily, let's say, or not. Yes, if you hold a gun to my head, I'll go out and shoot for an hour, but maybe that's not what I want to do. But I wanted to ask you, because something you said earlier reminded me of something else. So you said in college, you're putting together your own zines. How did you guys print? Were you printing on demand, or were you binding yourself? Or
yeah, that's a good question. At RIT, we did have the luxury of having one of the great printing colleges on campus too. So sure, it was. So we had access to the very early like Indigo press. So like some of the first on-demand jet or toner presses were there. So we were able to do things on really small budgets and leverage those kind of first. And we would do some stuff like photocopier zines, but that was becoming nostalgic already at that point in the era. And really, we were just like, okay, if we learn to use InDesign, put the file together, prep it for press, go on press and look at color proofs. And it felt like a very natural extension of the kind of printing work we were doing in the darkroom and the kind of printing work we were doing on desktop things. But just because we had this amazing, like so many of those resources at RIT are so amazing, you're so spoiled by it. But we were like kind of ahead of the curve of on-demand printing. And so and they were like very, we would throw a kegger for the print party and we'd, be like, we came up with $400. We want, this many copies. And they'd be like, all right, I think they were making some in-kind contributions there to the endeavor. But
I made a couple zines mostly as photo albums, right? Because the idea of the photo album that your mother or grandmother has, where it's like a big binder and it's 10,000 pages long and the photos are flying everywhere, is dead to me. I don't see people doing that anymore because they don't get their pictures printed, right? Like they put together photo albums on their iPhone. But I wanted to make a couple of like our trips to a place or whatever, and also caption them so people would remember who the hell people were, right? Because part of the problem I see is that everybody forget, in regular photo albums was always like, oh, if your aunt so-and-so was only here, she knows everybody in these pictures. So I will tell you, putting together a zine, even like that, the editing portion of it is art. I mean, gonna lie, it's hard.
But that's where I fell in love with editing. That was just I think there was some things, I always loved photo books. And I think the book was just such a great medium for photography. But that idea, just that basic idea of order you photographs in is very important, and moving things around. And I just always loved going with the big laser printer and printing out all the pictures and cutting them up and moving them around on a inboard or whatever. And that's the kind of curatorial process too.
And so I was gonna add, if you thought when you did the zines and you had to lay them out, whether that sort of piqued your interest and led you down this road towards more curatorial endeavors.
Definitely. Some of my favorite memories of just were like talking with my friends about how does it go, this picture, that picture? What if you take out a picture? How does that mean? Figure things out. What if we did a blank page here and things like that? Those just very, very just rich in terms of understanding what pictures are, how they make meaning with each other, how unfixed they are, but you can start to put some anchors down with your editorial process. And I think I was always, and I did a lot of work in video too. It's a very similar process, right? Like when you're working on editing kind of film together and you're just like, this clip before this versus after, it just begins to change everything. So that was just, in some ways, that really became the more interesting to me than what am I pointing my camera at and clicking the shutter. And I think that led to a lot of how I was drawn, because I was always drawn to like artists like Andy Warhol and Richard Prince and like his kind of appropriation practices. And I was really interested in like the 70s pictures generation, like thinking about how images already existed in the world and what does it mean. I think that was always such a thing I struggled with. Why would I go to the football game to take pictures of people playing football when we have 10 million photos of a kind of a type of thing? And like what I think that really led me on a path where I was thinking about like surfing on the ocean of images versus generating my own contribution to them. And I always loved, and part of it was just that was what the rebels were doing at the time. And I was always drawn to that. And I was always drawn to these kind of, I'm sure the lawyer and you'll appreciate, I was always drawn to people that were questioning authorship and copyright and like what is intellectual kind of generation, how is it mediated through these things, like these things that I think are often taken for granted, but I think are quite complicated. They're clear from a legal sense, they're probably complicated from a legal sense, but especially from like a what is creativity question. That was my happy place.
I'm taking this master's program, and one of the things the guy who is in charge of it is fond of talking about is the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, right? There was a guy who came up with the idea. Mm-hmm. There was a guy who shot some of it, and then there was a guy who collaged it. So there were three different people involved. And I think the photographer owns the copyright, even though the picture was not the finished product. And that to me was always amazing because even as an attorney, I always think of copyrightable property as the finished product, right? Not some step in between. But the other thing is, how about the guy who had the idea?
Yeah. And I think that was so much of the art that I became really interested in the 60s and 70s and 80s when they're into minimalism and post-minimalism and conceptualism, which really centered the idea as the art. And the craft was something anyone could do, you could do or not do. The art existed because the idea existed. And there's a million ways that became complicated. And I think I'm also just very interested in those collaborative workflows where you get to a finished thing, but maybe 10 people had real influence on what that looked like and that push and pull over it. And I think there's just a desire for humans to think about an artwork being singularly, clearly, definitively authored by one person. And to me, that was what so much of postmodernity and pluralism, and even I think a lot of identity politics was about really pushing back on that kind of narrative of a singular visionary genius and reintroducing an idea of a kind of collective authorship or communal authorship or collaborative authorship. And I think that was what I was, especially when I was more producing works. A lot of my works were downloading a bunch of YouTube clips from a lot of different creators. We would call them creators today. Now, back then it was just people who talked about stuff and put it on YouTube and editing them together. So they would be having conversations. And I was not shooting video, not shooting photographs, but really thinking about editing as the art form. And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So how did you end up back in Pittsburgh then?
I graduated grad school at the time of this great big old recession. And
oh yeah, that's right.
I wanted to start my career teaching. I wanted to start my career in museums. I was still very young. And I went out into the great wild world after getting my prestigious master's from a prestigious program, and everywhere was laying people off and all the budgets were being slashed. And it was just really a hard time for every industry, but the culture industry, I think, especially. So then I started my career in Apple retail instead. I was working at the Genius Bar and doing, which a whole tangent, miserable experience for me. It wasn't what I wanted to be doing, and it was very challenging, but I learned so much about so many things, just grinding a couple of years of that kind of retail life. I was teaching, I'd pick up classes when I could. There's a lot of kind of adjuncting work here and there. And then I got a job in Syracuse, New York at a really wonderful organization called Layout Right, which is an artist residency. And it was just about 100 applications. It was where I got a job. Probably more like 200. Yeah, I remember. It was just really tough times, but I applied for the artist residency. I'd never been as a resident. And so they can't have me as a resident. They'll have me as their kind of middle manager of things. And that's when I got my start in this institutional thing. I'd also been doing a lot of curating, especially film screenings and experimental film back then. But Syracuse learned about running an artist residency program, met a ton of cool, amazing artists, and also learned a lot about just admin life. That was what I was learned about accounting and bookkeeping, and learned about managing employees, and learned about just the kind of just middle managers are the people who really make the world go round. And I learned
that I can use all that, if he can use QuickBooks and all of those.
I think I was always interested in institutions, right? And I think museums and schools and all these places, as things were very just interesting to me. I was in love with them, and I still am in love with them with what they put out, kind of output they put out. And then I think as an administrator, I learned that the language of institutions is actually written in profit and loss statements and balance sheets and budgets. And there's this kind of language that if you can learn to understand, it actually uncovers these. I always say, when we're thinking about ourselves as an organization and thinking about leading organization, you have your mission statement that you write in words, and then you have your truer mission statement that you write in your budget. And Yeah. And I didn't know any of that stuff. So I didn't know how to use, I didn't know how to make a formula in Excel. So that was a real eye. Not a lot of lawyers do, as I'm learning. So that was a big, how are we making this kind of endeavor go? And that was really interesting to me. We didn't stay in Syracuse very long. It was only about 10 months total. And then my father was very sick at the time. So my now wife's girlfriend were looking to move back, and an opportunity happened at the Silver Eye Center for Photography, where they had posted a job. It was a great little photo nonprofit, but had been through some hard times. And it was a staff of maybe had one part-time staffer at the time. And it was just like a kind of a next step where if you want to see what this kind of thing is like, be the executive director of a very small organization, give it a try. And I think we felt like nothing to lose, wanted to be back home. Seemed like an interesting challenge, and away we went. That was 2014 that we came back. So that was 10 years ago. And that was great. It was really challenging, but it was great fun in the sense of because it was going through such a tough period as an organization, you had full autonomy to reimagine the program, work with any artists. The board was really open-minded to like, let's try something because we need to. And so we relocated the gallery to a new space. We kind of connected with communities. And yes, that's what took me back. And that was where I feel like my career really got started in earnest, was thinking about reinvigorating that program and that institution.
And then obviously when this opened up, you applied, got the job, and here you are today.
Yeah. And I think in some ways, they're very similar institutions, and that's what took me. So I was at Silver Eye for 8 years, and a lot of how I thought about reimagining that institution was based in places like Mattress Factory and places like Lightwork that I was always really interested in. I love museums, and it was never that interested in forming collections and caring for and preserving collections. I really loved working with artists. I especially loved working with artists in that residency model where you're really working on what is interesting to them today.
And they're alive.
And they're a lot
Like in museums that are building collections where maybe they're not all alive.
And so I think the Lightwork thesis was like, let's find the most interesting people we can work with, put together as many resources to support them as we can, and invite them to town for a month or two. And so when I was thinking about the Silver Eye program, what I really got excited about curatorially, which was a big change for me, was like, I want to invite people. Because when we moved Silver Eye, we were able to develop a print lab, like a digital print lab. We could do printing and framing and do large format stuff. And that really opened up this thing where we can say, hey, I want to work with you on a show. I want you to make something new for the show. I don't want to show the work that you've already done. Maybe the show is 2 years from now. Let's develop a project. And really, they're very artist led, but really not. Oftentimes we work in that way where you're not just going to their studio and saying, I think these 4 pictures work really well together. Let's go with that. Oftentimes it was like, we're going to meet in 6 months. Show me what you came up with, and let's talk about like how you made it and why. And that was just always the most exciting thing to me. Those meetings were like Christmas morning, looking at new contact sheets and stuff like that. And so that's why I was really drawn to Mattress Factory. It was because that's always been the model here. We really just invite artists from all over the world to come to a residency, and we pick them based on them being, we think they're really brilliant artists, and they come here and we might invite them 2 years before their show. So we're developing an installation, a project over the course of a long time, but they're coming here, they're making something new. It's always kind of site specific. It's always really artist centered. We support and mentor and curate whatever they need, but it's really always the artists leading. And I think coming from this place as being trained as an artist really gave me a passion for institutions that it's like they trust artists. They put artists first. I think we're, from a programming standpoint, we're always at our best when we're putting our kind of curatorial egos aside and thinking ourselves as partners or collaborators, but we're supporters and followers, and we're letting artists lead.
So it sounds to me, you're always happy when you talk about your jobs, whether it was at Silver Eye or here, which is great because you always ask me, how's it going? How's work? And I say, it sucks. And then you always have something happy to say. So it does sound like you found your niche, so to speak, in terms of being able to work with people, curate, talk to artists? Do you think that's
I will put it this way. I'm not a person who can do things I don't believe in. I think that's why my tenure at Apple was really difficult, because in some ways I could do the work, but some people were like, "Oh, you want to climb that ladder? You could be regional manager one day." And I would, like, "Listen, don't." I would go break out in hives, and just wasn't where I wanted to be. And I think this kind of work, especially in Japan, I would say, because I believe that what we're doing is my calling. It's always been a big part of my identity. It's where I wanted to be. It's what I believe in. It's what I care about. It's like what I feel like I could help bring this important thing to the world. So that kind of keeps me going, because it's not always easy. There's certainly,
they call it work for a reason, really?
but I think you're always underfunded. You're always like struggling with resources. There's a management job. Managing big teams of people is never easy. And there's a lot of my days are spreadsheets and QuickBooks and grant applications and things that are not like your number one fun part of your job. But I think when I put it in the context of what's it all for, and because it is all for something that like can be a very tangible thing we bring into the world when we're at our best, it helps. I don't know if I could say that for all the kinds of work, but
right. And I get it. Am I right that in recalling that you once also worked in a photo lab?
I worked in an equipment cage.
Did you not? I thought you worked in like processing film, no?
No, so we had all the kind of places at RT were connected. I worked in the equipment cage. So we had this huge cage full of probably 1,000 cameras, lights, stands, flags, like whatever. And all the students could check out equipment. So I worked there, and that was connected to, we had a photo lab in school.
Oh, and weren't you the one who sent me the place up in Syracuse to send my film?
Probably, yeah. We worked with a lot of those labs, and some of the labs like helped run the campus lab, but I processed a lot of film because we had to process our own film at school, and not on a lab level, but on an individual level. But no, there was the cagers who did the equipment cage, and the labbies who did the on-campus lab, and I was always the cager.
So the only reason why I'm asking you this is because, for people who don't know, you called me the dentist. Early on in my resurgent film photo career, it would be great if you could explain to people what it means to be the dentist. Because, by the way, I noticed when I was cleaning up all my cameras to get them ready for the move, on must be one of the underwater Nikons, there's a return address label in gold with black lettering for a dentist. So I want you to know that I now own a vintage Nikon underwater camera owned by an actual dentist.
Owned by an actual dentist. So there's and I do not mean to disparage any dentists. I have nothing but respect. But I think that the term is used, and I don't think it's just photography. I think it's a lot of crafts and hobbies. And I feel like people say the word hobby is like a derogatory thing. I'm a big believer in hobbies. They're like part of your humanity. To be a person without hobbies that's like a sad thing to me. But I think what I would often see in this line of work is, I think I'm very fortunate, whereas like I made choices where I just did the things I wanted to do, and it worked out for me. And I've never been rich, but I've always enjoyed my jobs. And I think I've met a lot of people who are successful professionals with demanding jobs, and they've reached a level of comfort in life in terms of they have some money, and especially at some point when they have a little bit of money and a little bit of time, they ask themselves, like, what do I want? What do I care about? And what am I going to do with it? And I think, so like you being a successful lawyer and just seeing maybe I don't have to work 80 hours a week starting my career anymore. If I wanted to take some time for myself, what would I do? And you're like interested in photography. And I think, where do you start? And I think that's such an overwhelming question, that I think the easiest place for a lot of people coming to a medium to start is in gear. And for many reasons. One, because you literally just need it to do anything. And it's great. Like, gear is great. It's pleasurable. It's fun. It's interesting. It's engineered. If you're a person who appreciates the sort of well-made camera and a beautiful lens, and it's fun to collect things. But sometimes you get to a point where there's folks who have collected a lot of gear, but not made a lot of artwork with it, or not made a lot of decisions about what they wanted to do with it and how to use it. And in some ways, so I think we say there's, and I used to do these photo reviews, and I've taught a lot of classes and stuff. So I think I've met a lot of people where I've had a version of this conversation where it's like, you have a beautiful camera, you are like beginning with this medium, but where I'm saying can be very gear focused. And I'm like, what do you want to say? What do you want to do with it? I think that for me, it's always a hard experience because I'm buying cameras when I'm 20 and I'm drowning in student debt and I have no money. And my kind of situation was always like, do whatever you can with whatever you can, because I have all the time in the world, but no money. Right. And the situation gets flipped. And I think
Dennis have a lot more money than me, just so you know.
Yeah. I think I think that is a really challenge. And I think when you come to this place, when you're new to a medium, the other thing that's just hard is it sucks to feel like you're bad at something that you care about and you're learning about. And I think that experience of anyone doing any hobby and any creative pursuit is like a lot of failure and a lot of learning, a lot of iterating. And I think that feeling could be even worse if you've just bought a very expensive camera and you're still not feeling like you're making pictures that are satisfying to you.
So I'll tell you why I don't consider myself a dentist, and you can still call me the dentist. It's because part of the reason why I started was because I found my Nikon FM from high school with a half roll of Tri-X in it, and that was exposed in 1996, but I found it in 2016 or 17. Took pictures of my kids who then ran around behind me to look in the memo holder on the back of the camera for the picture. And they were like, where's the picture? I'm like, it's on film. And then Libby said, what's film? And I was like, what? And it was 2016. I went on eBay, and every camera I ever wanted when I was 16, 17 years old was available for $50, right? Because it was still early. Even then was early. And like now, there's just no way. Like I got stuff that I have at least one copy of every Nikon Professional F, from the F to the F6, because I was like, I'm just going to do that. But I found like really inexpensive bodies. And now I look at it and I'm like, holy, some of them are more expensive than they were when they came out. And so it's amazing to me. I know why I bought them. I bought them for the same reason that you just explained, which is I was in high school. I took my mom's Nickermat. I traded it to a dude to get the FM and 3 lenses, and that was it. And I would always read photography magazines, whatever, and be like, oh, if I could only not have this plastic Nikon pancake lens, maybe my pictures would be a little bit more in focus. As I figured out later, I needed glasses. That was part of the problem. But I don't even though some people have referred to me as the geezer of gear, I will not wear the moniker the dentist, although I probably am. At some point, if you saw how much I had, David, you'd be like, you're not a dentist, bro. You're an orthodontist.
And I think there's like kind of separate conversations happening, right? Which is, I think there's like an impulse to collect. And I think and I have an impulse to collect, and I collect a lot of small scale art from trends and from things I care about. I don't have a huge impulse to collect. And I think in some ways working in that equipment cage for a long time, I don't know if you need a number of a good rental house. You don't need to own things. But I think there's just like objects you care about that are meaningful to you, that are interesting to you, and keeping those. I love that. I don't think you even really have to articulate so much why those are important to you, like as long as it's working for you. But I don't think you are going through what I really try to caution people against, and what I try to just make clear, and I think people understand this, is there are no shortcuts through gear, right? And I think that's that is really expensive.
I know about the F stop.
not about up. And I think there's a real truism in photography and all creative pursuit. The only way forward is to put one foot in front of the other and I was going back to that critique conversation. I always thought it was funny because you would talk endlessly about people's work or what they were doing, what they were trying to do. And so at some point you just be like, the only way to get where you're going is just to keep going and make more pictures and look at them and think about them and then make more pictures based on that and look at them and think about them and make more and that is, I think there's always a promise of something making that creative process less punishing, but really there's no way around it.
Since I'm about to start the second semester of my master's, where it will be a punishing work-related part, because you've been in touch with the lecture for my first semester, but it was all photo theory and stuff like reading photos and what are the meaning of photos, all of which was new to me. But let me just ask you the burning question in my mind, which is there ever a photo that's just a good photo, or does it always have to have a meaning?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it just depends on the kind of context. And I think the wonderful thing about photos is they exist in many different modes, often simultaneously. And you can access them in the way that you care about. And you can advocate for them in the way that you care about. So you can have, and I think some of it is just these meanings are just not fixed. I think about photos I love, and some of them, there's moments where you're like, this is really intellectually fulfilling because I've read the theory. I know what it's referencing and in what context it's in. And that's really juicy to me. And that's a little bit more how I'm oriented. But you can also say like, that's a beautiful picture, and there's pleasure and beauty is truth, and just to appreciate. And I think some of these are different trends and different ways of thinking. I think I was like in my younger days, and I was going through, and I was really interested in like really conceptual art, really challenging art, and the sort of I was very drawn to like anti-beauty aesthetics and artists that were challenging beauty, and that was really meaningful to me. And then at some other point, it was just like, fuck, no, beauty is important to me. Pleasure is important to me. Meaninglessness can be important to me. Mystery, not articulating things. So I think the answer is yes, and all of the above. It's all true. It's all at once. And it's like totally overwhelming. But it just depends on what you need from it, what you're trying to give people, like where you are with it. And I think anyone who says beauty isn't enough is probably not being completely honest, right? Like I think at some point in some time, we're just humans. Like beauty is important to everyone.
I'm fond of asking until everybody wants to throw up. Isn't a cigar sometimes just a cigar? Isn't a photo just sometimes a photo? Like a photo of a flower, isn't it sometimes just a really good, colorful picture of a flower?
No, it's never just that.
Why? Why is it never just that? Because we're going to go stick my head in the toilet and flush my head myself. I'm going to give myself swirlies now.
We're interpretation machines. I think we want to see connections. Like I think, and in some ways, like, and this is a thing just about kind of audience and interpretation, where it's like the flower could just be that to you, and maybe you can deal with it on that plane, and that's like it. And you will show that to someone and they'll be like, that's the white chrysanthemum. That's the flower we put on my mother's casket when we buried her. That's not just a flower to me. And that kind of narrative and interpretation and desire to make connections, I think especially in photography, because photography represents the world so well. And those representations like always pull on threads within whoever's looking at them. I think it's almost never just a thing.
So if that's true, then do you think that every photo is somehow, to the viewer, to the individual viewer, somehow nostalgic?
Not every photo has
I don't mean every photo, but it's possible that, I shouldn't say every, but any photo could be nostalgic to the right viewer.
Yeah, that's the other kind of special thing about photography is its pastness. Like, it's a nostalgia machine because Those are inherently of the frozen moment in the river of time, right? That is always past looking. And I think that's why I think that is a kind of particularly juicy part of the medium, is that relationship with nostalgia that photography has. And I think I'd agree with that.
So I'm going to try and share my screen and show you a picture. Not that I took. See now. How? Okay. Can you see that?
No, I'm just seeing a gray square. Oh, there we go.
Yep. Have you seen this before?
Is this the AI picture?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you sent me the article.
Yeah.
About it.
This guy,
That I didn't read. Yeah.
this guy, I forget his name, but has done this whole series called pseudo amnesia, right? And these are all not photographs made to look like photographs that were taken, I don't know, 40s, 50s, right? This photo, though, this one was entered in a contest and apparently won. And then he confessed that it was AI generated. But my question for you is, do you consider this photography?
Strictly speaking, no. But I would say, and this has always been like a really interesting question to me. Like it's certainly something new, right? But it's also not that new, right? There's all sorts of non-photographic ways to generate images. You could paint it, right? If you had a high enough skill level and paint it from your mind. I think I remember being at the Museum of Contemporary Photography and having questions a lot about what was photography and what were the limits of our collection, how we were defining photography, because there was a artist whose character in the video game Second Life was taking photographs inside the world of the game.
Oh my God, it's like you're reading my professor's mind, because when I said that this was not photography because it's not the focusing of light through a lens onto a photosensitive chip or piece of film, he asked the same question. And what was to me, a character taking pictures in a game is a screenshot, no?
So I think we came to the strict definition that is a screenshot. But I think we also came to the conclusion that our mandate as a museum was about photography, but was also about how photographs operate in the world. And that is an intrinsic part of the definition of photography, is how they work in the world, the influence they have on culture, their dissemination. And that was increasingly important. So I think not we, because I was just a fellow, but I think the kind of decision that was made was that we would be a photography museum, but we would also include within that discourse these adjacencies as like relevant and important to reckon with. And to reckon with like in an open-minded way, but just to say, so we did end up purchasing some of those Second Life photographs. I think they were included in the collection, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's very much this conversation with AI. What do we do as a community of people who care about photography with images that look like photographs but aren't? What does that mean? What does it mean the generations of people that have a photographic likeness, but it isn't one? I think it's exciting because it's such a new moment to like think about these questions. But I think it's very important that we come to it honestly and come to it from a point of view of to understand like actually what is this thing, what is its nature, what are its implications, and say this is not a photograph, but it certainly impacts photography, and it certainly impacts the way we will understand photography, and go from there.
But so to me now, this is the film versus digital argument. To me, is dead now. Like there's going to be some percentage of people who will always shoot film or shoot film next to video or next to digital. And there's going to be people who are just always going to shoot digital. But to me, this kind of image generation versus photography is interesting because it's not slice of time frozen in the stream of the rest of time, because that moment never existed.
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason why, on the one hand, I can appreciate, wow, that's a pretty powerful image never to have been taken. But on the other hand, it never really existed. Yeah. So I struggle with, because it makes me abnormally angry, I'll say, when people say that's a photo. Because
I think that's generally when things make you abnormally angry, it makes me think there's something there to it, whether it be pure charlatanism and it's to be fought against, or it's undermining something that you have accepted as a kind of inherent truth of the universe. And now you have to reckon with this new world. Like, I have to say, AI image generation feels like I haven't come across a lot of kind of AI image generation that has felt very interesting to me, because I don't think a facsimile of a photo is in itself interesting, right? Just the fact that you can trick someone to thinking it looks like a photo is okay. So what? I think photography is like very interesting to me because it has that relationship to the world that I find that is really like at its essence, right? This was light reflected off a thing that went through the lens, and the thing was there, and there's real meaning there. And like painting's I care very much about painting but in some ways, like painting, to me, is so much about like paint and the studio and the artist's hand and like all those things. I think AI is those kind of image generator things. I don't know. Perhaps I think the most interesting thing is going to be our relationship to a kind of algorithmic intelligence, and what is that going to tell us about us, and what is that going to tell us about the world, and how are we going to reckon with our new kind of relationship with technology going forward. That's to me what I find powerful, but I don't know how to make an image of that, and that's why I'm not the artist, right? If the right artist will start to crack that code and say something interesting. But I think those kind of images are interesting because they are when I was working a lot in appropriation of images and thinking about, we would often call them like these vernaculars of kind of photography styles. And it might be like cowboys, Richard Prince would family do the cowboy, the Marlboro Man, like all these kind of tropes that put together formed a vernacular, or 1940s style instructional photography, or a 50s kind of portrait studio in a small town in America, like all these things that. And I think AI is very good at reproducing things within those vernacular sets, right? Because they have an image set of infinite image basically to train on and to work from. And so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what to make of all that. It's novel, but it's not terribly interesting to me yet. I'll say this, a friend of mine he was on the first episode of the podcast, and he is a cinematographer, director, and I showed him some of the Sora videos, the sample videos from ChatGPT's engine. And he was pretty amazed at that time, and it's come forward a lot since then. But what he said to me was, okay, but can it write the script? It can, and of course it can, but what he meant was, can it come up with the idea, then figure out what shots it wants to take, shoot it, create the dialogue, then call me back. Yeah. And I feel like I'm at this place where with the technology, in some ways, this is just I've taught the history of photography for a long time. I think the history of technology is, we should know enough by now to know that a lot of those questions will be answered in pretty uncomfortable ways, probably pretty quickly. In terms of what the technologies can do, it's amazing. It's incredible. Just is the fact that you can enter in a prompt and it can return something to you so accurate to what you're looking for, and to generate these things. I don't think the question is, can it? Because it probably will be able to. I think the question is really for us, like, what does that mean in terms of authorship and creativity, and what does it, right? What if an AI writes a really popular movie, but it's bad, like humans have been doing forever? I think the question about a lot of these tools will be like, how will they challenge and influence our creativity. Just when photography came out, there's all these writings in the 1830s about what is the painter, what is the artist going to do. An image not generated by the human hand is a kind of an abomination of the human spirit, and these machines have replaced us. And I think there's some parallels. I think there's a lot of things that are really different about this leap of technology, but I don't. But this is why I love artists and creatives, because like these answers are going to get made in ways that we just can't fathom yet when we have this conversation in 10 years. But it would do.
Will I be going to the movie theater to watch some AI generated movie? I guess in many ways I already do, but
In many ways you already do. You'll certainly have the option to. I don't know. Maybe the better question is, will you still be able to watch a human movie shot on film with great passion and art? And I don't really worry about through all these things. I don't really worry about. I worry about the industry in terms of the effect it'll have on artists and craftspeople who depend on it to make a living. That is a big concern of mine. I don't really worry about it on like the creativity of the human spirit, and human art still exists. As long as humans exist, that'll exist. I think we're okay there. But I think more of my concerns are from around the economic models that creatives sustain themselves with right now. That's a great concern.
yeah. I really appreciate you being on. And I just want to let you know that your cousin Henry now has a cause figure in his room.
Yeah.
In addition to 2 different cause books. And I and Libby apparently were the only 3 people that enjoyed the Warhol cause exhibit at the Warhol Museum.
No, there's many who enjoy it. I enjoyed it. I think it's all in part of this conversation where I think there are so many accepted narratives of like how we put things into conversation. And then when you change that conversation, it makes people uncomfortable. It's supposed to make people uncomfortable. It's supposed to challenge some things. And I think I'm now getting to the age where seeing Henry like kind of his attachment to cause is this is a new kind of cultural blueprint. This is not the way I understood. Like this is a kind of a new generation's.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. Taking them to that exhibit and seeing it through their eyes is a lot. I walk through and sometimes I'm like, oh, I've seen this.
Yeah.
But like Libby loved all the windows that Warhol did and the shoe ads in New York Times. Right. And so it's really interesting to see what they're each drawn to. Right.
Yeah.
Like they both love the cause Snoopy drawing.
Yeah.
Hank, but it is right. And that's image generation on top of an image.
I think that was talking about like challenging indigestible art in its time, thinking about Warhol, thinking about appropriation, thinking about authorship, thinking about automated processes, removing the human hand from processes. Like nothing could be more provocative from the factory, Warhol's factory, and also now to think about it as the standard of innovation for 20th century art.
Exactly.
And the kind of great artistic accomplishment of the time, and just really being accepted as, I think that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about AI, when I'm thinking about all these things where when you take that long view of this will go from being a kind of scandalous abomination of creativity to normal to celebrated within 50 or 60 years, and just get ready.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
We talked about this forever.
Yeah.
I appreciate that we finally got it done.
When are you guys gonna come back to Pittsburgh? You know, so it's just every 5 years for Grandma Edie, I guess.
Pretty much, yeah. I may be there in, I can't remember, maybe, well, that's not until April, but I don't know. Michelle wants to go somewhere warm. What can I tell you?
It'll be warmer in April.
Yeah. I mean, she wants to go somewhere warm now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, don't come here. Give everyone my best. This was really fun. Yeah, saying we'll keep the conversation going, man.
Yeah. I'm going to have to shoot this semester, I'll send stuff.
Yeah, send you some pictures. Yeah, just send me some AI prompted mid-journey generations of. I feel like a lot of mid-journey, but if I was still a photography professor and you came in with that attitude about it, I would give you an assignment to make 100 mid-journey images.
Well, that's exactly what Connor said. So you should go watch, I forget what film it is, The Five. It's like the guy who gives his mentor 5 things to do that are 5 obstacles. I should make you buy a digital camera and shoot with that, and then make you do AI pictures.
Yeah. It's a little cheesy, but I think there's a lot to be said for leaning into the thing that makes you the most uncomfortable.
It doesn't make me uncomfortable. I understand it. I get it. I think the pictures are great, but it makes me furious when people think that they're call them photos. And the reason why this guy made me so furious was because he won a photo contest.
You don't sound that comfortable to me, brother, but
What's that?
said you don't sound that comfortable to me.
Only because hey,
Yeah.
that's the lawyer in me, right? If there's a set of rules, you got to play by them. Come
I
on.
remember I was thinking about teaching the history of photography. There was a great little like mini documentary on Richard Prince and the Marlboro cowboy images and him going to auction, but also interviews all the photographers who worked on those Marlboro campaigns, some of whom own any of the copyright, and it's all owned by the Marlboro Scheinhardt Corporation, whatever. And I think when I first started taking this now, you do something for 20 years and you first start showing it, people are like, oh yeah, that's interesting, that's cool. And I think the last couple classes, furious, nothing but fury and anger about
Marlboro man?
about stealing the Richard Prince image from the hardworking commercial photographers. And
Really? Okay.
yeah,
They got paid. They got paid for the job, right?
No, I think it was just the attitude towards this intellectual property just changes a lot. I think it's very generational, but I think it was a moment where unrestrained anger towards how unfair it was, how dishonest it was, how deceptive. And of course, like I think with all those things, the people doing this, I think are often, they're trying to be provocative, right? Like they're looking to provoke, and that's part of the piece. And but yeah, it's just, I thought that was one of the more interesting changes in terms of these kind of.
That is interesting because I never even, for commercial photographers, you get a job to go shoot Maxwell House, right? Or whatever it is. And you sign a contract and you get paid. And as a professional photographer, you're signing the copy right away, right? Usually to whoever hired you. That's the thing that surprises me. Yeah. It's not like they ripped them off.
No, I think but I think there's a kind of,
Because they have a second life now, you mean people are mad at them?
yeah, because Richard Prince is directly uninterested in acknowledging the original photographer. He's interested in existing. I think he's interested in exploring it as an authorless vernacular and trope.
But it is, right, at this point.
And I agree, but I think when I have these students who are like, no, like this guy made that. That is, maybe they understand the legal ramifications, but I think ethically they're feeling the outrage. And I think
that's interesting to me because the other thing is somebody gave him that job. Somebody on Madison Avenue dreamt up that guy, not the photographer.
Exactly. And I think and someone.
Talk about watching Mad Men, right? Like, Lucky Strike was their big,
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of image generating AI machine is you can speak what you want to see, prompt engineer, if you will, to Department of Creative Directors and photographers and copywriters. And as a visionary, you tell them what you want to do and they go out and do all the work and bring it back to you. And again, it's just whose idea is that? I got to shoot the shit with you all day, Dave. This is really fun.
Sam, but you get to go back to work in a museum and I'm going to go back to writing something really boring.
I've got a court time, so I'm off to play tennis.
You know what? you enjoy that.
But I feel confident that the law is in good hands with your stewardship.
Sorry for that drastic drop off there. We were recording on Microsoft Teams, and I think we just ended the recording too quickly. In any event, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I want to thank you for tuning into the Subconscious Photography Podcast today. If our journey through the art and science of photography has captivated you, please subscribe to the podcast, share it with friends, and leave us a positive review. Honestly, I know every host says that, but it's true. Sharing this podcast with friends and leaving us a 5-star review is the easiest way to support this podcast and help ensure its continued success and production in the future. We are excited to continue this exploration with you, and you can visit us on the web at www.subconscious-photography.com for more episodes and content. You can take a look at some of my own favorite photographs, and you can also email us your comments and experiences directly through the website. If anybody has any questions they'd like to pose, they can also be sent to us through the website. Your insights and support are invaluable to this community. So please listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music Podcasts, or whatever your preferred podcast provider may be. Please join us next time for more adventures in subconscious photography. Again, I'm David Senoff, your host, and thank you for joining us.